Delighted to say, live from Westminster, the Business and Trade Secretary Kemi Badenoch joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, a lot of us are welcoming with open arms Rishi Sunak telling us that he wants to help hard-pressed British families, and actually we're going to look people in the eye, explain what's really involved and the costs of net zero. But why has he announced it now? Why this week? What's changed in terms of the facts and the costs? Because we knew all this years ago.
I don't think that, that's been quite the issue. The Prime Minister has been very much focused on his 5 priorities, and I think that he wanted to show that he was delivering on those before talking about difficult decisions which he would need to take for the long term, of which this is one. And what he is changing is the approach in terms of how we're reaching net zero. This is still a good thing. We know that we want to have energy security. We know we want to reduce emissions to help with climate change. We know we want cleaner air. We have to do it in a way that works for everybody. We've got to bring people along with us, not just impose difficult and expensive things too quickly, which means that we lose the consent to actually do the right thing.
Well, again, people weren't given a choice at the last election. All the major parties all promised this. But you know as well as I do that commitment to the net zero target at 2050, as he said openly, the Prime Minister, he's still committed to that. And we know it's enshrined in law, in the Climate Change Act. Without repealing that act, you're the Business and Trade Secretary. You can't build a nuclear power station or gas power storage. You can't do anything. You can't build a new airport. You can't do a single thing without a legal challenge in the courts.
That's not quite true. We can do that. You're right. People do bring sometimes very spurious legal challenges to stop us from doing anything that might contribute to economic growth, but they tend to lose. What they end up doing is actually wasting a lot of government time. But I think this is something which people will understand, that we're taking the right decisions for the people of the UK in order to make sure that we meet our targets in a way that is fair and proportionate.
Was this policy decided based on, some people are saying this is a bad thing, I'm not necessarily sure it is, based on politics rather than economic reality? Is this something that's been focus grouped and the Prime Minister thought, I'll take a gamble that the British public are talking the talk, as many politicians and climate campaigners do on green issues, but actually they're not willing to walk the walk and pay these huge costs that are being required of them to hit this, and that he thinks this is going to be a vote winner? Is this about pleasing focus groups, feeding voters, or is this about something he genuinely believes is the right thing to do?
It's about being honest with people. It's about being honest with people.
So he wasn't honest with people a week ago,
Lots of people... No, he hasn't changed the commitment to net zero.
Yes, he has.
Being honest with people.
No, but he has changed.
Julia, let me finish. Julia, no, we're still committed. We're still committed. It's how we're doing it in a fair and proportionate way. And what he said is that we need to be honest with people about the cost. Simply saying we're going to do this and not let people know what it really means, in some cases up to £20,000 for a household when it comes to things like heat pumps and gas boilers. That is a reality which hasn't always been made clear, and that's what he's doing.
But that was the policy until yesterday.
It's about doing the right thing.
But that was the policy until yesterday. So was he not being honest, and was he not doing the right thing then, if he is now?
Julia, remember he inherited those policies.
He said he supported those policies.
They are things that are constantly debated. One of the things that I have been seeing as Business Secretary is the varying arguments that lots of people have been making. We often hear about big business. We don't necessarily hear what small business has to say. They find these things quite challenging. What we are is a government that's listening and wants to deliver this in a fair and proportionate way.
Let's talk also about the car industry. I know that you've been hearing representations from them as Business Trade Secretary. We understand if Ford and other car manufacturers are saying, hold on a minute, we were told only a few days ago that you were committed to that 2030 target. We have years and years it takes to change our factories, our production, so we can focus on making electric vehicles, because petrol and diesel vehicles would be illegal to sell in this country as new from 2030. Now, a few days later, you change that policy. They say they need clarity and certainty. There's no doubt at all they've not been given that, have they?
Well, what we are doing is giving them clarity and giving them certainty with this change, which actually doesn't affect the decisions which they've made. We still want business to continue with a transition, but we have to think about security of supply, the supply chains. We look at what's happening with China and the economic challenge, which I discussed in quite a lot of detail last week. The fact is, the auto industry speaks to ministers, certainly speaks to me fairly frequently. They have lots of different views because they have different business strategies and different plans. What we have said is that we are still going to continue with that mandate, but in the final bit, we're not going to compel people because we think that this is something that can happen naturally without removing the choice for those who can least afford it.
Right, Lord Goldsmith of leafy Richmond Park, Zach Goldsmith, very much a Green campaigner on these issues and a Tory peer. He has called the announcement yesterday as a moment of shame that would be remembered as the moment the UK turned its back on the world and on future generations. What would you like to say to Lord Goldsmith?
Lord Goldsmith is a good friend of mine. I think he's completely wrong. I think that is an overreaction. I think he made those comments before he'd even heard what the Prime Minister had actually outlined, which are very sensible policies for the UK.
OK, can I ask you just finally, we understand that one of James Bulger's killers is to get a 2-day parole hearing in November. John Venables is going to be held behind closed doors.
I'm sorry, Julia, I'm not hearing you.
Oh,
you understand? I heard you understand. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, yes. I mean, James Bulger's, one of his killers, John Venables, is to get a parole hearing in November and could be freed by Christmas. The mother of the little toddler who was killed by John Venables and Robert Thompson at the age of just 2 years old, she says that she's no doubt that John Venables will kill another child. Should a child killer who's been released twice and taken back to jail twice because of looking at indecent images of children, should he have a parole hearing? Should he be eligible for release?
I have to confess, Julia, I don't know the details of this latest news which you have just mentioned. We all remember that story 30 years ago and how horrific it was. As a mother of 3 children, it's something that even now still terrifies me that something like that would happen. I think it's best to leave this to the Justice Secretary and the ministers who would know a lot more about why this is happening. I wouldn't want to comment, but I can understand people's concerns.
OK, just finally, I know I have to let you go, but we've had King Charles and Queen Camilla in France on a state visit. Some comments made on green issues made by the King in Paris last night. Were they negotiated with Downing Street last night, do you know?
I'm afraid I haven't heard the comments that the King has made in Paris. I'm just focused on making sure that people understand what the Prime Minister and the government are doing to make sure that we can transition to net zero in an affordable way. OK,
well, pass our message on to Rishi Sunak that he's made a good start. We expect more there. Thank you very much indeed, Kemi Badenoch, Business and Trade Secretary.